Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to church. Why don't we all stand together? We're going to sing some songs this morning. Let's go. We'll sing Arise. Arise, my soul. Remember this. He took my sin and he buried it. No longer I who live. Now Jesus lives in me. For I was dead in sin, but I woke up
to see the light. Hey!
Saved my soul. All else is lost. The grip of fear has no hold on me. So where, oh death, where is your sting? No longer I who live. Now Jesus lives in me. For I was dead in sin, but I woke up to see the light.
Hey! Hands together this morning. Oh, Jesus, for you. Yeah. Let's sing all of this for His glory. Sing, oh, all of this for your glory. You're the reason why we gather. Oh, all of this for your glory. Hey. Oh, all of this for your glory. Oh, all of this for your glory. All of us together. Jesus, it's all of this for your glory. No longer I who live. Now Jesus lives in me. For I was dead in sin, but I woke up to see the light. No longer Jesus lives in me. For I was dead in sin, but I woke up to see the light. Hey! We sing all of this. We sing, oh, all of this for your glory. For your glory. Oh Jesus, it's all of this for your glory. All of this for your glory. We love you, Jesus. You're so good. You're so good to us, Lord. Welcome, welcome, welcome to Suncoast Church this Sunday morning. So glad you're with us. I'm Mark. This is Emerson. This is the team. We're pumped to sing with you this morning. In case it's your first time, just thought we'd let you know what this whole thing is about. It's about a person called Jesus. Something we believe here at Suncoast Church is that it's Jesus in everything. Jesus in this singing, sure, Jesus in this service, Jesus in our friendships, but out of that, Jesus in our workplace, Jesus in our schools, Jesus in our university, whatever it is, Jesus in everything. You know, this thing can be about a lot of different things, I suppose. You know, we're in a series called Undivided because there's so much out there that can divide us. You look at the people around you in this room, we're all different different shades, different sizes, different walks of life, different backgrounds. But it's that one name that we're talking about. It's that one name that links us all together, that unites us all together. Who is Lord and who is King, and his name is Jesus Christ. And this morning we're going to sing a new song. It's called Graves into Gardens. And the reason why we worship him is because of this fact that he came from heaven, he came to earth, and he died in our place. But instead of staying in a grave, there was a grave in a garden. But he only laid there 3 days. Because on the third day, he rose again and turned that grave into a garden. And that's why we sing this morning, that's why we gather this morning. So we're going to introduce this chorus to you. And I pray that if you know him, that you would just reach in and grab these words for yourself. And if you don't know him, well, I invite you to know him. Lord, there's nothing better than you. Lord, there's nothing better than you. Lord, there's nothing. Nothing is better than you. It's a pretty easy chorus, but one more time for good measure. Lord, there's nothing better than you. Lord, there's nothing, yes, better than you. Lord, there's nothing. Nothing is better than you. 'Cause I know it's true, yeah. I searched the world, 'cause I searched the world, but it couldn't fill me. Man's empty praise and treasures of faith are never enough. Here's some good news. But then you came along and pull me back together, and every desire is now satisfied right here in love. There's nothing, Lord, there's nothing better than you. Lord, there's nothing better than you. Lord, there's nothing. Nothing is better than you. Yes, I know it's true. Yeah. Now I'm not afraid to show you my weakness, my failures and flaws. Lord, you see them all, yet you still call me friend. 'Cause the God of the mountain is the God of the valley. Your mercy and grace. I messed it up. There's nothing. Lord, there's nothing better than you. Lord, there's nothing better than you. Lord, there's nothing. Nothing is better than you. There's nothing better. Lord, there's nothing better than you. Lord, there's nothing better than you. Lord, there's nothing. Nothing is better than you. Jesus, you turn mourning to dancing. You give beauty for ashes. You turn shame into glory. You're the only one who can. And again, mourning to dancing. You turn mourning to dancing. Beauty for ashes. You turn beauty for ashes. You turn shame into glory. You're the only one who can. Turns graves into gardens. You turn graves into gardens. nothing better than you, Lord. There's nothing better than you, Lord. There's nothing. Nothing is better than you. I'm gonna sing a couple more times. Lord, there's nothing. Lord, there's nothing better than you. Oh, there's nothing better than you, Lord. There's nothing, not a thing. Nothing is better than you. Oh, there's nothing, Lord. Lord, there's nothing better than you, Lord. There's nothing better than you, Lord. There's nothing. Nothing is better than you. Turn graves into gardens. You turn graves into gardens. You turn bones into armies. You turn seas into highways. You're the only one who can. Again. You turn graves into gardens. You turn bones into armies. You turn seas into highways. You're the only one who can. You're the only one. You're the only one who can. You're the only one who can.
We sing, My Hope is Built. My hope is built on nothing less than Jesus' blood and righteousness. I dare not trust the sweetest frame, but wholly trust in Jesus' name. My hope is built on nothing less than Jesus' blood and righteousness. I dare not trust the sweetest frame, but wholly trust in Jesus' name. Christ alone, cornerstone, weak made strong in the Savior's love, and through the storm, He is Lord, Lord of all. dressed in his righteousness alone, faultless stand before the throne.
Christ alone.
Christ alone, cornerstone, weak made strong in the Savior's love. And through the storm, He is the Lord of all.
We sing Christ alone.
Christ alone.
2020.
I hate this year.
What's wrong with this year?
This year was supposed to be great.
This is madness. It's madness.
Inside good. Outside bad.
Wash your hands!
Does that mean we gotta start buying our own toilet paper?
Do you have a plan? I don't even have a plan.
I miss my family. I miss the coffee house.
The nights are the hardest. But then the day comes, and that's every bit as hard as the night. That's such a hard time for me.
As everywhere else, so we want to keep that as simple as possible. But to do that, we need to make sure everyone's details are kind of up to date. So you have paper versions, or you can open your camera app and you can point in that thing, and it will automatically send you to an online form, which is cool. Technology, yay.
Yeah, basically, we want everyone to fill out the form to update your details because it's just going to make everyone's lives a lot easier. There'll be less queues outside. That's why we also say, come 15 minutes early before the service starts. The doors open these days at 8:45. Just so you don't have to line up for 45 minutes just to get into the service. So yeah, I believe this.
We've got pens floating around, so if you need a pen or an extra form,
Oh, they're floating around. Yeah,
like
probably
pen around,
everyone needs a pen.
friendly play, it will help you.
But yeah, and obviously we want to keep putting out more and more chairs so we can socially distance. I think a good rule is if someone can smell your BO, then you're too close. I think it's generally the rule. I don't know why.
You're used to being around you. So
Yeah, true. So that's like a 7-meter rule for us, I think. Very cool. And we have a few things coming up that we do.
yeah, so we've got our annual general meeting, which is on the 25th at 6 o'clock. And on the same night, we also have groups training with guests. So that would be a great night. So if you are a groups leader or you might be interested in becoming a groups leader, this is a night that's specifically for you.
Yeah, and I see that there's dinner. I didn't know that. So that's exciting. I'll be there. Yeah, you can. Come for the dinner and the leader. Totally, yeah. So, no matter what demographic you are, if you're a connected leader, this is going to be really great to be at. And or if you may be interested, maybe. It's up the back if you have any questions after the service, or you can check out our website. But before we get Dan up, I just want to take a moment to highlight our giving as we do every single week. If you're a regular giver here at Suncoast, you can get your church app out now and do that as we speak. Or there are stations around the auditorium for after the service. But honestly, I truly believe that we are the most generous community on the planet. This is so great to be a part of. We, even through all of the lockdown this year and opening back up and everything's a bit out of whack with the world, through our many initiatives, we have just seen life after life being changed here at Suncoast, whether it's through the Daily Bread, our soup kitchen down in Nambour, Suncoast Christian Care, Red Frogs, our youth ministry. There's just so many amazing things happening that wouldn't be possible without you. You know, I'm kind of like a big believer that God wants to do something incredible in our lives, but also through our lives and to the lives of other people. And every single week we have an opportunity to see that happen through our giving. So thank you so much for your generosity. It's amazing what we get to do. But without further ado, we want to introduce our speaker this morning. He is a long-standing member at our community. You'll see him serving just about every week here, whether he's up at the tech desk or he's signing your kids in over at the kids sign in. Amazing. Him and his family are insanely generous towards our youth community. So we look up to them a lot. And I think he's got a message that's really going to bless you this morning. So I'd love it if we could welcome Dan Willis this morning.
Wow. Good morning, everyone. I was like feeling a bit exposed out on the stage. I'm the fill-in guy because Jono's obviously at home nursing a new baby girl, Noah. And I think we were all very fortunate last week to get Garth in. Next week, I believe Brendan's on. So the good thing for those who haven't met me before, I'm Dan, by the way, is that Brendan will be back next week, and he's a fantastic communicator. And so that's the good news. For the rest of you, I guess it'll probably end up being a fairly short morning, so that's probably the other good news for the day. So, look, well, for those, I guess, that I haven't met, I'm married to Alison, who's a way better communicator and a way more attractive communicator than me. And we have two beautiful teenage girls, Emma, who's just under 16, and Beth, who is 14. And they're probably both serving in the kids' ministry this morning. So that's us in a nutshell. But look, I'm hoping everyone is surviving this very unusual 2020. It is a very unusual day or year. But when you look outside this morning, I mean, the sun was brilliant. Spring has sprung. And look at you guys. You guys look fantastic from up here. There's like all sorts of colours and everything. It's fantastic. So this year, one of the things that I've found really, really quite challenging, I guess, as the year has progressed, is I've actually found, as I've gone along, there's a number of people I just don't like. I guess that sounds a bit harsh now that I'm up here. Let me say it a different way. I guess there's a number of people that I find it easier not to hang around with. And if you're wondering, who are these people? It's actually people who mistreat or mislead my children. And you might be looking at it going, oh, it must be a teacher. A teacher's done the wrong thing, and all the teachers in the audience are going, nah, parents just don't get it, Or maybe it's a coach, they put their kid on the field despite my kid obviously being better. Or maybe, like, they're teenagers, right? Teenagers are just brutally honest, so maybe it's just kids leading kids the wrong way, But what it is, what I've noticed as I've gone along is I've realised, and this is, like, really interesting, and I think most people relate to this, is if you've got a problem with my kid or you've mistreated one of my children, it's pretty hard for you to be okay with me. So you can buy me gifts and you can take me to the football, which I would still like, but you can sing me songs, but really, if you've mistreated one of my kids, probably we're not going to be okay. And conversely, I guess the same applies if you really look after one of my kids, and this is where it is easy to talk about teachers or coaches, because in both of our girls' lives, they've had both of people that just pull out talents. We're like, wow, we didn't even know you could do that. And there'll be some teacher at school who's been investing in for a few months, or pull out strong points of their kids. And so it's the same feeling, like if you're doing something for a kid, if you're lending your resources, if you're leaning in and making a space for my children, man, it just feels huge at home. It's kind of like almost you're doing it for me, even though you're really just doing it for my kids. And so, I got a good example years ago, and both of my girls play soccer. They didn't grow up in like a dancing family. We got two girls that play soccer and rugby sevens and, surf and do a few interesting things. And many years ago, when Beth was a lot smaller, she was playing a game. When the kids play, for those who've got younger kids, they play soccer and it's like a half field. And so we've got these two half field going, and behind it is a full field where the bigger kids were playing. And someone kicks a ball and it goes right past the goals and it goes right across this other field where these other kids are playing. And it was a fairly big kick, so it kind of kept going, and some dad runs onto the field from the other side of this other big field at the back, picks it up and takes it off. And then I think he's realised, that ball came from somewhere, and all these little kids are looking around going, what do we do? And so this dad, he just gives it a boot, and we could hear it. We're about 50 metres away, and this ball comes flying over. And of course, Beth, being quite small but quite game, just decides, I'm going to catch this, and comes running across the field and jumps up with sort of one arm And next thing we hear this bang, and the kid just drops everything and runs straight towards me on the side of the field and gets there and bursts into tears. And I've looked at her wrist and I thought, what's going on? So the coach comes over and she's sort of sitting down and we're trying to look at her arm and it's like starting to swell up. And we're like, yeah, you know, Alison's like, I'm like, I'll take the kids to the soccer. And, you know, she leaves the kid with me for 30 minutes and it's already, you know, disaster. So I could see what was happening there. But next thing, there's this mum that I didn't even know has bent down next to me and asked if she could have a look. And the next thing I know, Beth's sitting at a table in the shade. She's got ice on her arm. This mum's feeling around and saying, oh, look, I've got some concerns about whatever. And the next thing she said, is it okay if I bandage it? Out of her handbag, she pulls like a bandage and bandages the kid up. And I'm like, who is this lady? But she's a mum of one of the little girls on the team, and she's given up her time to watch her daughter to come and look after my daughter. And I'm just there touched. Now, I didn't know anything about this lady. I didn't know her political persuasion. I didn't know whether she was pro or anti-immunisation or whether, you know, like whether she was a Maroon supporter or, you know, all those important things in life. I didn't know anything about it. But what I felt is I felt like she was 100%. She'd stepped in for my kids. She'd stepped in for me. And so for weeks after, you know, she gave me some instructions. Make sure, you know, I think you probably need to get this an x-ray and you probably need to see a GP and a few different things. And, you know, the next couple of weeks she kept checking, how's Beth going? How's she going? I'm like, this is amazing. So anyway, look, I guess I just wanted to get that off my chest. Thanks for listening. You know, like, I know when we look at life, we often see how I guess we quickly move everyone into groups and you break people up into bits and pieces. But if you've been tracking with us the last few weeks, you know, for whether you're an Impact Church, whether you hear Suncoast on the weekends, or whether you're just online, we've sort of been exploring this really crazy season. We're talking about the series called Undivided. And what we noticed over the time that we've been together, we've been actually sort of grappling with this whole concept that despite all the views, all the different thoughts, the different gifts, talents, opinions, different, I guess, persuasions that we have, that Jesus called his followers to centre around, I guess, one theme, and that's really how we treat the people around us, how we show love by how we treat people. And over the weeks, we've been sort of going over the concept of how the first followers of Jesus gathered together. And they really did around one central idea, like in unity. And they focused their actions around outworking love in their communities. And so, if you're new to church, maybe this is something different to appreciate, but the first Christians were known for how generous they were. And they were a mix of the original Christians were a total eclectic mix. You kind of had, you know, retired soldiers. You had people who were like, you know, poor people. Most people were poor. There was only a few governing rich. And they had slave masters, and you had like slaves and the children of slaves, and you had orphans, and you had people who'd been disempowered and dispossessed, and they sort of came together, and that was kind of the church. But they actually helped a whole heap of people, and they took in kids that were just cast out on the side of rivers, you know, and left to die, or just all sorts of stuff. And they looked after people, and it didn't matter what your political persuasion was, whether you thought, you know, Rome should rule forever, or whether you wanted to get rid of them. It didn't matter really what your religious bent was. And it definitely didn't matter on your social status. And so the arrival of Jesus signalled something completely different to, I guess, what we would say the world knew at the time. So society was divided. I mean, there was just like a Roman government that was busy conquering, you know, and making people subject to it. There was also, at the same time, a Jewish temple that was trying to stay intact, and it was sort of controlling the people, making people work in a different way. Who was approved, who wasn't, who'd made the grade, who hadn't. I mean, it was racist, it was class-driven, it was sexist. It had all these things that Jesus wades into, picks this time in history to wade into this mess, and he started to come and respond in a different way. He valued the disempowered. He valued those people who were sort of downcast. He valued the people that Rome or the Jewish temple had pushed aside, or maybe even both. And he lifted them up. He elevated women. He elevated children. He elevated people who were dispossessed. He elevated the poor. The kind of things that he did that were so different to what was occurring at the time. And there was really nothing that you could say, like when you looked at the whole situation, People who are nothing like Jesus loved Jesus. They seemed to want to be around him, and he loved them back. And it's just a totally different view to, I guess, what was happening at the time. So the consciences of Western Christians today have been shaped by so many things. Not only by the teachings of Jesus, but by this paradigm that still exists. And, Jono's often called this thing like the temple approach. And really, what he's referring to is not necessarily the Jewish temple, although that's probably part of it, but he's referring to, over the years, there's been this model of religion that's evidenced in ancient Babylonia, the ancient Egyptians. We know it from the ancient Persians, and obviously in Jesus' time, where there's sort of like a temple that's almost there, and it sort of controls people to some extent. And I'm not necessarily talking about a building per se, although that seems to be part of it. But there's almost 4 presuppositions that we could almost put into this model, just so you can get a baseline for what I'm going to compare today. They were all in a sacred place. I think we have a slide on that, where you wear special clothing. Alice and I have been to some of these things. You actually go to, St. Peter's, Basilica in Rome, or you might go to St. Paul's Cathedral, perhaps in London. I think we went to the largest mosque in the world one time in the UAE, and you have to wear special clothes. You have to be quiet, like really quiet. And you have to sort of walk in a certain way. And I know with the mosque, you had to have a certain head covering, you had to go bare feet, and all the women had to make sure they had pants right down to their ankles. It was, a special sort of place. But, sacred places, there's sacred texts. There's always a sacred text, oracles, documents, things handed down, copied from one generation to the next and handed down for people. And these are often difficult to interpret. And so you had sacred men who would interpret the sacred text and live and dwell or work in these sacred places. And for some reason it was always men. I don't know why this is, but it was always men in these kind of spaces. So it was exclusive. So it was geographically located. It was with difficult to determine documents or difficult to understand. And it was exclusive for these sacred men. And so then there were sincere followers. I guess that's the 4th one. Maybe they were scared followers. I couldn't actually say they were necessarily sacred followers, because in the West we seem to have a lot of cynical followers. So it was like, as we kind of work through this model. But these people, they were sincere. They followed the sacred men who interpret the sacred text, who dwell or work in the sacred place. And this is like really a humanity issue. Without going too far into it, it's like, I guess what we see is people just making structures and things that eventually, potentially, through no intention of their own, but eventually end up just setting up rules and rituals and things like that to control people. And this is something we see over and over again throughout history. But Jesus ushered in something completely different, something brand new. He stood in total, like a stark contrast to this approach that religion has centered itself. And he brought in a new covenant, and he started something brand new that was a relationship between God and man. That you didn't need to be in this sacred place. You didn't need sacred men and sacred texts. It was a whole relationship between God and man. And Jesus dropped the whole exclusivity that was happening and invited everyone to encounter God's redeeming grace. And he made it accessible, and so much so, and this is a classic in the story for anyone who knows this story, so much so that people were offended by it. Those in most power ended up conspiring enough to kill him. And there was a new command that he gave that unified his followers. Just one command, really, that superseded everything else and it became like a filter through which everyone would interpret everything else, almost, I guess, in a hierarchy in a way, or like a lens, I guess, through which everything else would be evaluated. And it was like this whole new ethos or ethic that would be through his followers. And it would trickle down, and that's showing love by putting our neighbour's interest before our own. And I think Jesus said it this way: it's a new commandment I give to you, that you love one another. And this contrasts so much with the temple approach, which relied on a whole series of rules. It relied on obligations. It relied on rituals. But the problem we run into today, the problem that I run into, and I'm sure the problem you probably run into, is that we sometimes run a risk of blending this whole temple approach with Jesus' commands. And so we end up with an approach to Christianity that's actually sometimes differs quite a bit from what Jesus originally intended. And so when you look at it, you're kind of like, internally, we can run the risk of finding conflict inside ourselves when we feel like, oh, I should do this, but I want to do that. I should do this. And we kind of almost feel like we're hypocrites. Or together, like when we come together, it actually reduces our effectiveness on how we can actually influence the world for good, because we're trying to almost keep a foot in both camps. And it's subtle. But if we look, there's evidence in how we react to everyday stuff. You say, damn, what do you mean? This is a fairly distinguishing thing what you're talking about. Must be, how do you distinguish what you're trying to say? Well, I guess my thought is this. If this week you would feel guiltier about missing mass or church or a meeting than how you treated someone at work, it probably gives you an indication that, man, everything's not all 100% well. So if you can come to church, I've got to get to church, I've got to kind of meet, I've got to get my life sorted out, but it doesn't matter, I treated such and such at work like a so-and-so, or, this person, I've treated them poorly, fill in the blank, then it kind of indicates there's probably some issues there, If you ever ask a question, I think we've all probably asked this question, especially when you're a teenager, I really want to do something, but how close can I get to sin before I really annoy God? Like, what can I do? How close can I get before I tick him off? Is kind of the idea. And I want to make sure that I'm not making him upset, because I don't want anything to go wrong. But man, if I could get that way, and I know this person's they're going to get done, they're going to get shafted, but it's something I really want to do, and it looks fun, and maybe I can get away with it. If you ever get to that question, or maybe if you actually think, there's some sort of ritual I can do, or there's some little prayer I can pray or whatever, that I can really treat someone real bad, but as soon as I go and say, God, I'm sorry, it just whitewashes it, and I never have to be responsible for making any restitution for the person I harmed. Am I making sense? You can see there's a different way to how Christ set us up. So if my view is keeping me from showing love to a you, if my view is keeping me from showing love to others, we're going to create internal conflicts. And so at the heart of this, I guess, temple approach that I know Jonathan's spoken about before, but at the heart of the whole thing, it all comes down to, it's all about me. It's all about you. It's you-centered. And the heart of it is a question which, it starts off sounding like a great question, but when you follow it to its end, it's really not the question we should be asking. And the question is, what must I do, or what must I believe to keep things right between God and me? And so, because at the end of the day, if my religion is all about making sure God is right with me, it kind of leaves a fair challenge that maybe our religion is all about us. We're the centre. And for some of us, that's how we pray. God, bless me, bless my home, bless my life, bless my kids, bless... for some of us, it's why we come to church, I don't know, you can imagine, when you're a teenager, it's like, hey, God, just see where I was Sunday morning. Don't look too far back. Forget Friday night. Let's just forget Friday night. But Sunday, you saw where I was, right? Right? And we're trying to, I guess we're trying to impress God, And for some of us, that's why we give. For some of us, that's why we might ponder and search or read different stuff, whether it's a Bible or whether it's, a devotion, whatever it is, so we can actually make sure that our way forward lines up with what God's saying. And it may look God-centered, but at the end of the day, your commitment to Jesus, we may find it's actually just about us. It's just about me. And so I guess this is sort of almost bringing this little bit of a topic of conclusion, but the temple approach to, the way you think, it gravitates over and over towards rules and rituals, and we make excuses why everyone else should be at this standard, but we've got an excuse as why it didn't apply to us. And so what it comes down to is, what exactly must I do to keep God happy? And then, as long as we sprinkle a little bit of this kind of temple thinking with our faith, it will lead us to some point along the way where we're questioning, God, what must I do? What must I believe to keep you happy with me? And it becomes quite self-centered. But Jesus, the good thing about this is Jesus actually already came and addressed it. And he said, hey, this is a whole way of thinking. I actually want you to leave, abandon, get out of completely. Because the Jesus model, or the way Jesus taught us, is to approach or to put the centre point of focus on the you besides you. So, let's talk about that for a sec. So if you're like a Greens supporter, it's actually the person to your right. If you're a Conservative voter, it's the person to your left. If you've got a problem with racism, it's the person you don't want to have anything to do with. And it's actually probably going to extend all the way down to the person that you might even think is your enemy. And following Jesus is an invitation to live a life that's focused solely really on yourself and your own interests, and to take on a whole new meaning. Like it invites us to love people that are very different to us, and to love them the way our Heavenly Father loved us. I guess it's why Jesus had kind of this one command: love one another. It's probably why Paul in the early church wrote this whole thing. And he said, it was like looking at of all the scriptures he wrote, and he said, the only thing that matters. And we're like, wait a sec, Paul, have you seen how thick the Bible is? There's like how many things that we should and shouldn't do, and I'm sure it must have a heap of rules if it's that thick. And he might go, yeah, I know. I wrote 50% of the letters in what we call the New Testament now, all these documents bound up. I wrote about 50% of them, and I'm still convinced that the only things that matters is faith working itself through love. Or maybe, someone could have been even bold enough to write that the entire law is fulfilled in keeping just one commandment: love your neighbour as yourself. So this whole departure from this temple thinking, this temple approach that Jesus brought, where he made everyone equal, from rich masters to slaves, to the children of slaves, people that had nothing, no money, to sinners. And he gave them all equal access to salvation. And he asked us to love those around us, which was evidenced by how we treat others. That's the people we encounter every day in our workplaces, in our schools, in our universities. And sometimes this is hard. Sometimes it's not easy. But I guess I'm just thinking, let's be honest, let's be adults for a second. In most instances, like in most relationship situations, most of us know if we were confronted with a question, we intuitively know the answer to the question, what would love require of me in this situation? And where this, I guess, began to really challenge me is you can quickly find a loophole as why you don't need to help that person, or why you can respond, or why you're right and what you've done. I mean, I've got 2 teenage kids. Sometimes there's an argument over the weirdest, funniest things, and you're like, really? You're fighting over the last cracker? There's another 6 boxes in the cupboard, it's just not even an issue. But we sometimes, we get into our silos and our turf wars and all those sort of things, and you try and loophole your way out of why sometimes you shouldn't just show love. But the essence of following Jesus really comes down to that question. What does love require of me? What can I do? Because everything else just becomes commentary, right? Everything else is just an illustration, or maybe just an example of that question. What does love require of me? So, just, I guess humour me for a bit. Imagine what our families would look like if when there's a dispute or when there's something difficult, you went, what would love require of me in this situation? Because I know, every now and again there's a score, and he's been out this many nights in a week, or there's there's sometimes turf wars, there's politics, there's battles, there's siloing, there's all sorts of things that go on in families for different reasons, sibling rivalry. But if you ask that question, what does love require of me? What does it require of me? What do I need to do? I think it's a really strong push. Or in our community, how different would our community look if, let's just break it down. If even just the Christians on the Sunshine Coast for 1 month decided, what does love require of me, to that boss I don't like, to those employers that I find difficulty with, to that workmate, in my education setting, on my university or college or wherever I'm at, kids at school, whatever it is, what does love require of me? So, Jesus' command, love one another. The hallmark of Jesus' followers is their extraordinary love for one another. not just like standard, but extraordinary. So imagine like a world where people were critical maybe of what we believed. Imagine a world where people would look at, people in a church context and go, like these people are a bit crazy, but they were envious of how we treated one another. Envious of what we'd be like as employers or employees maybe, and envious of how we looked after the one another that was beyond our immediate circle of friends. And that is why Christianity survived the first 300 years, despite all the persecution. And that's what we've been called to do. And I think the early church changed the world. I mean, 300 years in, on the 4th century, and Constantine goes, man, the politics are too much. We're going to make it the national religion, and it changed the world once. And if we think and we start to get our lives, geared up along these lines, I'm convinced we can change the world again, and for better. So, I'm imagining, I guess it's all easy when you've got the microphone, but someone's probably sitting here and going, man, it's going to be good when Jono's back. We'll talk about God again, This is kind of all about people. And you kind of dumb down the whole gospel message just to a group of people. And, I like your philanthropic views, but, at the end of the day, we should be talking about God, right? And the things of God and about God and how amazing He is and His splendor and how big He is and how powerful He is and, the glory of God kind of thing. And, this can't be it, can it? Can this be it? Well, that's actually a really good question. I thought, yeah, fair enough. That probably is a good question. But I'm really glad, because I'm not that smart a guy, but I'm really glad that Jesus actually answered it. So this is where we actually do get to look at some text. And I had to write mine down so I remember it. But I looked at, there's a bit of conjecture about this little section I'm about to read, about when it occurred exactly and whether it occurred a few times and where exactly it happened in Jesus' ministry. But there's definitely no conjecture about what it was about and what He said. And I'm hopeful when you hear it, it bothers you as much as it probably bothered His first listeners. And it definitely bothers me anyway. And so Jesus said, when the Son of Man comes in His glory, and all the angels with Him, He will sit on His glorious throne, and all the nations will be gathered before Him. And He will separate the people one from another as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goat. So the picture of Jesus coming and sitting on a throne. And He will put the sheep on His right hand and the goats on His left. Now, this made heaps of sense back then. They were an agronomic society. This is 2,000 years ago. Now we're like sheep, goats, like some people, what's even the difference, And then if, Alice and I have been over to Africa a few times, and often over there they have a thing called a shoat, which is sort of half sheep, half goat. And that was just really confusing, but not when some of the guys we saw in Kenya, man, they know how to farm land, and they've just got this huge produce of shoats. But anyway, that's just another confusing side story. So then the king, this is Jesus, will say to those on His right, "Come, you who are blessed by my Father, take your inheritance, the kingdom," so an inheritance that's a kingdom, "prepared for you since the creation of the world." And you can imagine these guys, right? They're sitting there just going, well, this is us. What do we do? Well, what do we do to get this? Like, why were we selected? Like, I know everyone's not selected. Why us? Why were we chosen? What do we do to get this? Why us? And then Jesus responds, "For I was hungry and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty and you gave me something to drink. And I was a stranger and you invited me in. I needed clothes and you clothed me." So you imagine how this conversation's going. And it's like I just try and put myself in the crowd, right? And so if you're in this crowd, it goes, why do we get all this stuff? And he goes, "For I was hungry and you gave me something to eat." And they're like, "Hungry? I don't remember doing that. This is the first time I've seen this guy. I don't remember seeing this guy before." And it's like, "I was thirsty and you gave me something to drink." "What? Did you give him something to drink?" "I don't know. I didn't give him something to drink." "Can you be quiet? Listen to him. "I was a stranger and you invited me in." "Well, I invited Jesus into my heart, but I don't remember inviting no guy into my house. This is just how it works, "I needed clothes and you clothed me. I was sick." Jesus doesn't get sick. Shh. "You look after me. And I was in prison." Jesus went to jail. "And you came to visit me. And so this discussion would be going on, and people would be like, but I'm sure I only remember inviting Jesus into my heart, and then kind of was like about, well, God, can you bless me and can you look after me and can you make my life work out and, help me with these kind of things. And I thought Jesus was looking after me, but this is kind of like reversing the tide as though I'm looking after him or I was meant to be looking after him. Like, I'm so confused. And then the righteous will answer him, and they ask this question, Lord, when did we see you? When did we see you? When did we see Jesus? When did I actually see Jesus? And when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? When did we see you a stranger and invite you in, or needing clothes and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison and go visit you? And you can see this tension. Like for me, it's just like, man, it's just, I saw you look, when did I feel close to God? Like I look at my own life, right? And I felt close to God over, a lot of times, and maybe it was like when my favourite worship song was on. I was at a conference or something like that, and it was just, this is the song, and I don't know, this probably showing my age is some big massive guitar solo, and I feel like I felt God, like kind of thing, and or maybe it was a drum solo back in the days, in the 80s, but like you just, there's times where we feel like we've connected with God, and it may be that, it may be someone in a small group where someone just opens up scripture, or maybe someone, it's a youth camp and you're around a campfire and you just pour out your heart and you just know God reaches into your life and touches you, or maybe it's like a quiet time at home where you're just reading and just the words leap off the page and you just know your life's never going to be the same again. And you felt God, or maybe for some of us, if you've traveled and you've been to spots, maybe you've been to the Holy Land and you walked where Jesus walked. And you went up the southern steps to the temple where Jesus walked when he was a kid. Or maybe you were in the Garden of Gethsemane, or, there's so many things you can do where you could have actually thought, man, I'm sure if I was going to find God, it'd be in this place. It'd be in church. It'd be in wherever I was. So surely that's where I'd see God, right? And I'm sure if God was to sit and go, hey, Dan, these are all great things, but let me ask you some questions. I'll be like, sure, Who got the most out of that concert that you went to? Or who got the most out of that small group event? Me or you? You have to go, probably me. Who got the most out of your trip when you went to the Holy Land and you had a look at these places? Who got the most out of when you got to go and, St. Peter's Basilica, in Rome, or when you went to the Roman Forum and saw all these kind of areas? Who got the most out of those things? It was probably me. So who was that for? God or for me, really? I guess it was for me. And I think God would just say, well, that's good, because that's not entirely what I was talking about here. It's not that you shouldn't do all those things. It's not that those things aren't important or of no value. It's just the essence of following me is not about you. And so I guess the passage concludes where the king replies and says, truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brethren of mine and sisters of mine, you did for me. And so the strength of this is you saw Jesus when you saw someone in need. Jesus seems to be pretty clear when we see someone in our street, in our community, in our home, maybe, in our classroom, in our different recreational settings. That's where we see Jesus. Wow. So what happens if the Jesus approach just centers on the you beside you? What happens if the approach that Jesus brought in is to center on others and to focus on others rather than always just on our own self-interest? So our devotion to God really is illustrated, it's demonstrated and authenticated by our love for others. So you can see why it's been a bit of a challenging year for me. So not only your love for, that ethereal, invisible, intangible thing that many of us, particularly from a Pentecostal type background, love and appreciate about God. Not only that, but in your love for other people as well. So I guess that's probably why when Jesus was taught his disciples on how to pray, and he sort of gathered them together and he said, when you start, he used some sort of a phrase that kind of put us all in the same boat together. And what was it? I think it was our Father. And I get this idea that, God is there looking out for each of us and the person beside you. So did I mention at the start something about if you mistreat one of my kids, then all the giving, all the singing, all the generosity, all the helping probably isn't going to really count for much? And did I mention that the best way to honour me really doesn't have that much to do with me at all? It's how you look after one of my children. So it's like when you do something for them, you're really doing it for me. So what does love require us to do this week? I guess the question is, what if it's all just that simple? It's hard, but it's just that simple. What if it's as simple as, what does love require of me this week? And to honour God, I'm going to choose to love the person next to me and the person next to them. And what do I need to do to make sure that their life is better off because I'm in it? And the thing I've found, the harder someone is to love, the more it honours your Father in heaven. So what if we just got that right? I guess we'd stand undivided. It would change our families, it would change our community, it would change the whole world we live in, right? If we just got that right, and it'd be so much better off. I think it has the power to change the world. Let me pray for you. God, we are just so thankful, God, that you've not just left us alone on this earth, that you've actually come, you waded into our mess. God, and you've left us with this text that's been around for 2,000 years that just challenges us. And God, we're just so thankful today as you've just, God, that you open our eyes to see what we're meant to do, how we're meant to respond as individuals to the people around us, the people in our lives. And God, that you give us, I guess, the wisdom to know what to do and the courage to then go and do it. And we just thank you, God, that you are always opening doors for us to walk through to make someone else's world a better place. We thank you for it. Amen. Well, thanks everyone. I hope your Sunday is a brilliant one. Next week, Brendan's on, so stay tuned for that. Have a brilliant Sunday, and we'll see you all next week.